Hello! Welcome to our channel. Today we have an inspiring story full of life lessons to share. If you enjoy meaningful content, leave a like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion means a lot to us. Let's get started with this touching narrative.
The late spring evening was warm, with a light breeze carrying the scent of jasmine through the open windows of the sprawling suburban home. The dining table was adorned with expensive china, crystal glasses, and an array of dishes that screamed wealth and prestige. It was the kind of dinner that should have been a celebration of family, but instead it felt like walking into a lion's den. Emma adjusted the napkin in her lap, her fingers trembling slightly. Across from her sat her mother-in-law, Barbara Whitman, a woman whose very presence could make even the most confident person shrink. Barbara's piercing blue eyes seemed to cut through Emma, her perfectly coiffed silver hair and designer ensemble completing the image of a matriarch who ruled her family with an iron fist. To Barbara's left sat Emma's husband, Daniel, a tall, broad-shouldered man with sandy brown hair and a kind smile that had melted Emma's heart the first time they met. But tonight, his usual warmth was tinged with tension. He was aware of his mother's disapproval of Emma, though he had always defended their marriage. The dinner began smoothly enough, or at least as smoothly as these family gatherings ever went. Daniel's younger brother, Peter, cracked jokes about work, trying to lighten the mood. His wife, Michelle, chimed in occasionally, but even her sunny disposition couldn't erase the undercurrent of tension that always seemed to surface when Barbara was in the room. "Emma," Barbara said suddenly, her voice sharp yet sweet enough to mask her intent. "I was just telling my bridge club how lucky Daniel is to have found you." Emma glanced up, unsure whether the compliment was genuine or laced with the kind of condescension Barbara had mastered. "Thank you, Barbara. That's kind of you to say." Barbara tilted her head, her lips curving into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh yes, I told them how you came from modest beginnings. It's truly inspiring how far you've come." Emma felt the air leave her lungs. She knew where this was headed. She had heard the veiled jabs before, but never in such a public setting. Daniel shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. "I suppose it's every girl's dream to marry into a family like ours," Barbara continued, her tone syrupy. "The security, the connections, the lifestyle. It's understandable." There was a beat of silence. Peter's fork clattered against his plate as he paused mid-bite. Michelle shot Emma an apologetic glance, clearly uncomfortable. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice low but firm. "What are you trying to say?" Barbara's smile grew wider, and she leaned back in her chair, as if savoring the moment. "Oh, nothing at all, dear. I was just thinking about how fortunate Emma is. And well," she let out a small, theatrical laugh. "I mean, surely we've all wondered if it was only love that brought her here." The words hit Emma like a slap. Her cheeks burned, and her hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but the lump in her throat made it impossible. Daniel stood abruptly, the legs of his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The room fell silent, everyone frozen as they looked at him. "That's enough, Mom," he said, his voice like steel. Barbara blinked, feigning innocence. "Daniel, I'm only saying what others are too polite to mention. I think it's important to be realistic about these things." "Realistic?" Daniel's voice rose, the calm exterior he usually maintained around his mother cracking. "You think it's realistic to insult my wife at a family dinner? To question her intentions when she's done nothing but love and support me?" Barbara's expression hardened, and she crossed her arms. "I'm only looking out for you, Daniel. This family has a reputation to uphold, and I'd hate for you to be taken advantage of." Emma finally found her voice. "Barbara, No," Daniel cut her off, his eyes blazing. "You don't have to say a word, Emma. You don't owe her an explanation." He turned back to his mother. "You've been looking for reasons to disapprove of Emma since the day we got engaged. But let me make something very clear. I love her. I married her because she's the best thing that's ever happened to me, not because of anything she could gain from it. And if you can't accept that, maybe we shouldn't be sitting at this table." The room was deathly quiet. Barbara's face was pale, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for a retort. Peter looked like he wanted to disappear, while Michelle stared down at her plate, pretending not to hear. Emma reached for Daniel's hand, trying to pull him back to his seat. "Daniel, please." He shook his head. "No, Emma. I'm done letting her treat you like this." Barbara stood, her movements slow and deliberate. She placed her napkin on the table and looked directly at Daniel. "You'll regret speaking to me like this. Mark my words." With that, she turned on her heel and left the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she disappeared into the hallway. The tension lingered even after she was gone. Peter cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, that escalated quickly." Daniel ignored him, turning to Emma. "Are you okay?" Emma nodded, though her eyes were glassy with unshed tears. "I'll be fine. I didn't expect her to say something like that tonight." "I'm so sorry, Emma," Michelle said softly. "She had no right to speak to you that way." "It's not your fault," Emma replied, forcing a small smile. "I know how she is." Daniel sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I shouldn't have lost my temper like that. But I couldn't sit there and let her insult you. Not anymore." Emma squeezed his hand, grateful for his support but worried about the rift this might cause. She knew how much family meant to Daniel, and as much as she disliked Barbara, she didn't want to be the reason he lost his relationship with his mother. After an awkward silence, Peter and Michelle excused themselves, leaving Daniel and Emma alone in the dining room. The remnants of the dinner sat untouched, the once celebratory atmosphere completely soured. Daniel pulled Emma into his arms, holding her tightly. "I'll make this right," he promised. "No matter what it takes, I'll make sure she respects you." Emma rested her head against his chest, her heart heavy. She wanted to believe him, but deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Barbara wasn't the type to let things go, and the battle lines had just been drawn. The morning sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains of the bedroom, casting soft patterns on the walls. Emma lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the events of the previous night. Every word Barbara had spoken echoed in her head, each one feeling like a thorn buried deep in her chest. Daniel's arm was draped protectively around her waist, his steady breathing the only sound in the room. He had stayed up late, holding her as she cried silently into his shoulder. She appreciated his unwavering support, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Barbara's words had left a mark not just on her, but on him as well. Carefully, Emma slipped out of bed, not wanting to wake Daniel. She padded to the kitchen in her slippers, the hardwood floor cool beneath her feet. The house was quiet, a stark contrast to the tension that had gripped it the night before. Emma poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen island, her thoughts drifting to the life she had left behind before meeting Daniel. The small apartment in Phoenix had been stiflingly hot in the summer, the broken air conditioner doing little to combat the sweltering heat. Emma had been fresh out of college, juggling 2 part-time jobs to make ends meet. Her parents, kind but perpetually strapped for cash, had done their best to support her growing up, but Emma had always known she'd have to pave her own way. She remembered the long hours waiting tables at a diner, her feet aching by the end of every shift, and the nights spent poring over job listings, hoping for a break. It was during one of those shifts that she met Grace, a customer who worked as an assistant to a local real estate mogul. Grace had taken a liking to Emma's determination and bubbly personality, and after weeks of chatting, she offered Emma a chance to interview for a position at her firm. That job had been Emma's ticket out of a life of paycheck-to-paycheck survival. She had thrown herself into learning the business, spending long hours shadowing agents and studying the intricacies of contracts and negotiations. By the time she met Daniel at a networking event years later, She was a confident, self-made woman, proud of how far she'd come. But none of that mattered to Barbara. To her, Emma's humble beginnings were a blemish, a reminder that she wasn't from the same world as the Whitmans. The sound of footsteps pulled Emma back to the present. She looked up to see Daniel entering the kitchen, his hair tousled and his expression groggy. He offered her a soft smile as he walked over to kiss the top of her head. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Emma shook her head. "Too much on my mind." Daniel sat down across from her, his expression turning serious. "Emma, I want you to know that what my mother said doesn't matter to me. I don't care what she thinks. I know who you are, and I know why we're together." She gave him a weak smile. "I know you do, Daniel, but it's hard not to let it get to me. She's your mother, and no matter what you say, her opinion carries weight. Not just with you but with your whole family." Daniel reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "She doesn't speak for me or for us. And if she keeps this up, she'll have to face the consequences." Emma sighed, conflicted. She appreciated Daniel's support, but she didn't want him to sever ties with his mother because of her. "I just don't want you to regret standing up for me. I know how much family means to you. And you're my family now," he said firmly. "You're my wife. That comes first." Before Emma could respond, the sharp ring of Daniel's phone broke the moment. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's Peter." He answered the call, his expression darkening as he listened. Emma sipped her coffee, watching him closely. "What do you mean she's telling people that?" Daniel said, his voice rising. "That's ridiculous." Emma's stomach sank. She didn't need to hear the other side of the conversation to know Barbara was up to something. "I'll handle it," Daniel said before hanging up. He rubbed his temples and let out a frustrated sigh. "She's spreading rumors." Emma's heart clenched. "What kind of rumors?" "That you married me for money," Daniel said, his tone bitter. "She's telling people at her country club, her friends, anyone who will listen." Emma closed her eyes, willing herself not to cry. "Why is she doing this? What does she have to gain from tearing us apart?" Daniel stood and began pacing. "Because she can't stand the idea of me making my own decisions. She's always wanted control, Emma. Over me, over Peter, over everything. And now that I'm standing up to her, she's lashing out." Emma set her coffee cup down and crossed her arms. "Then maybe it's time I confront her myself." Daniel stopped pacing and looked at her, surprised. "Emma, I don't think that's a good idea." She's your mother," Emma interrupted. "But she's also an adult who needs to be held accountable for her actions. If I don't stand up to her now, she's going to keep walking all over me. And us." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "If you're sure about this, I'll support you. But you don't have to do it alone." Emma gave him a determined look. "I want her to see me for who I am, not who she's decided I am. And if she still can't accept me, then at least I'll know I tried." Later that afternoon, Emma sat alone in the study, preparing herself for the conversation ahead. She wasn't naive. She knew Barbara wouldn't back down easily. But she also knew that letting the rumors and accusations fester would only make things worse. As she scrolled through old photos on her phone, a picture of her parents caught her eye. It was from her wedding day, their faces glowing with pride as they stood beside her in their simple yet elegant outfits. They had been so happy for her, so hopeful that she had found someone who truly loved and respected her. The thought gave her strength. She wouldn't let Barbara's prejudice and bitterness overshadow the life she had worked so hard to build. With a deep breath, Emma picked up her phone and dialed Barbara's number. The line rang twice before Barbara answered, her tone clipped. "Emma, to what do I owe this surprise?" Emma's grip on the phone tightened. "We need to talk, Barbara. In person. Today." There was a pause, followed by a dry laugh. How assertive." Fine. Come by the house at 3. As Emma ended the call, her heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know how the confrontation would go, but one thing was certain. She was done letting Barbara dictate her worth. The Whitman estate loomed ahead, its stately facade framed by manicured hedges and an ornate iron gate. Emma gripped the steering wheel of her car, her heart racing as she pulled into the long driveway. She had been to this house countless times before, but today felt different, ominous even. The sprawling mansion, with its cold marble and towering pillars, suddenly seemed less like a home and more like a fortress she was about to storm. Emma parked and took a moment to steady her nerves. She caught a glimpse of herself in the rearview mirror, her green eyes wide with determination despite the knot in her stomach. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. "This isn't just for you. It's for your marriage." She stepped out of the car and walked up the stone path to the front door, each step deliberate. When she rang the doorbell, the chime echoed inside, a sound that always reminded her of the first time Daniel had brought her here. Back then, she'd been eager to make a good impression. Now she was ready for a fight. The door opened, and Barbara Whitman stood on the threshold, her expression as frosty as ever. She wore a tailored navy blazer and pearl earrings, exuding the effortless elegance of someone who always made a point to look perfect. "Emma," Barbara said, her voice cool. "Punctual, I see." "Barbara," Emma replied, her tone steady. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." Barbara stepped aside, allowing Emma to enter. The foyer was as grand as ever, with its crystal chandelier and sweeping staircase, but it felt suffocating today. Barbara led her into the sitting room, where sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the pristine white furniture and carefully curated artwork. "Have a seat," Barbara said, gesturing to a plush armchair. Emma sat, her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. Barbara took the seat across from her, crossing her legs elegantly. "Well," Barbara began, arching an eyebrow, "what is it you wanted to discuss?" Emma took a deep breath. "Barbara, I know what you've been saying about me, about my marriage to Daniel, and I need to understand why." Barbara's lips twitched into a faint smirk. "I wasn't aware I needed to explain myself to you." "I think you do," Emma said, her voice firmer now. "Because your words are hurting not just me but your son. Do you realize that?" Barbara waved a hand dismissively. "Oh please. Daniel is a grown man. He can handle a little honesty." "This isn't honesty, it's cruelty," Emma shot back. "You've been spreading lies about me, questioning my character, my intentions. Why? What have I ever done to you to deserve this?" Barbara leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. "You want the truth, Emma? Fine. I don't trust you. I don't trust where you come from, and I don't trust your motivations. Daniel is a successful man, part of a family with a legacy to protect. And you," she paused, her gaze sweeping over Emma as if assessing her worth. "You're an outsider." Emma clenched her fists, fighting to keep her composure. "You mean I wasn't born into money? Is that it?" Barbara didn't deny it. "Let's just say I've seen women like you before. Women who see an opportunity and take it." "An opportunity?" Emma echoed, her voice rising. "Is that really how you see me?" "I didn't marry Daniel for his money, Barbara. I married him because I love him. 'Cause he loves me. That's all that should matter." Barbara's expression remained unmoved. "Love is a nice sentiment, Emma, but it doesn't erase reality. You had nothing when you came into this family. Now you have everything. Forgive me if that makes me skeptical." Emma felt the sting of those words, but she refused to back down. "You don't know anything about me, Barbara. You've made up your mind about who I am, but you've never once tried to understand my life, my struggles. Do you think I don't deserve happiness because I didn't grow up the way you did?" For the first time, Barbara's icy demeanor faltered. A flicker of something, regret perhaps, crossed her face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I've worked hard for everything I have," Emma continued, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I didn't ask for Daniel's money. I never expected any of this. All I wanted was to build a life with a man I love. But you've done everything in your power to tear that down." Barbara's jaw tightened, but she didn't interrupt. Emma leaned forward, her green eyes locking onto Barbara's. "Daniel loves you, Barbara," she said. He respects you. But if you keep pushing him away, you're going to lose him. Is that what you want? The room was silent for a long moment. Barbara's gaze dropped to her hands, which were folded neatly in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, almost hesitant. You don't understand, Emma, she said. You think this is about you, but it's not. It's about protecting my family. My sons. I've seen what happens when people marry for the wrong reasons. It tears families apart. Emma's heart softened slightly, but she refused to let Barbara off the hook so easily. I understand wanting to protect your family. You do. But you're hurting Daniel, and you're hurting me. If you want to protect your family, maybe it's time to let go of the past and start trusting the people who love him. Barbara looked up, her eyes meeting Emma's. For the first time, there was no hostility in her gaze, only uncertainty. I'll think about what you've said, Barbara said finally. Her voice clipped but not unkind. That's all I can promise. Emma stood, realizing she wouldn't get more from Barbara today. Thank you. That's all I'm asking. As Emma turned to leave, Barbara's voice stopped her. Emma, she said, her tone softer than Emma had ever heard it. You may not believe this, but I do want what's best for Daniel. And if you truly love him, she hesitated, then sighed. Well, time will tell. Emma nodded, unsure how to respond. She left the house feeling both relieved and unsettled. She had stood her ground, but she knew this battle was far from over. When she returned home, Daniel was waiting for her in the living room. He stood as soon as she walked in, his expression anxious. How did it go? He asked. Emma hesitated, then smiled faintly. I think I got through to her. At least I hope I did. Daniel wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Emma leaned into him, drawing strength from his embrace. For now, that was enough. The days following Emma's confrontation with Barbara were a strange mix of tension and quiet. On the surface, nothing seemed to have changed. Barbara didn't call, and the usual social whirlwind of the Whitman family carried on as if nothing had happened. But beneath the surface, Emma could feel the subtle shift. Barbara's absence in their lives, even brief, was noticeable. Emma spent most of the week focusing on her work, pouring her energy into the real estate projects that had always been her escape. But every so often, her mind wandered back to the confrontation, replaying Barbara's words and searching for hidden meanings in her parting remarks. On Friday morning, Emma was in the kitchen sipping her coffee when her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen and froze. The name staring back at her wasn't one she expected. Peter Whitman. Daniel's younger brother rarely called her directly. Though he was warm and friendly, their interactions were typically limited to family gatherings or group chats. Curious and a little wary, she picked up the phone. Peter. Everything okay? Hey, Emma, Peter said, his tone uncharacteristically serious. Do you have a few minutes? There's something I think you need to hear. Emma frowned, her stomach tightening. What's going on? Not over the phone, Peter said quickly. Can you meet me for coffee? There's a place near your office. I'll text you the address. Emma hesitated, caught off guard by the urgency in his voice. Okay. I'll be there in an hour. The cafe Peter had chosen was small and unassuming, tucked away on a quiet corner of downtown. Emma spotted him immediately, seated at a table near the window. His brow furrowed as he stirred a cup of coffee. Peter, Emma said as she approached, sliding into the seat across from him. What's this about? Peter looked up, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a gravity that made Emma uneasy. He pushed a second cup of coffee toward her, a gesture she appreciated, even if her nerves made it hard to drink. I've been thinking a lot about what happened at dinner the other night, Peter began, his voice low, and about what Mom's been saying about you. Emma's heart sank. I don't understand why she's doing this, Peter. I've tried so hard to be civil, to prove myself, but it's like nothing I do is ever good enough. Peter sighed, running a hand through his messy brown hair. That's the thing, Emma. It's not about you. Not really. Emma frowned. What do you mean? Peter hesitated, as if weighing whether he should continue. Finally, he leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "You know Mom's first marriage, right?" "To my dad." Emma nodded. She knew that Barbara's first husband had passed away when Peter and Daniel were young, but the details had always been vague. "What most people don't know," Peter said carefully, "is that their marriage wasn't exactly a fairy tale. My dad was difficult, controlling, and Mom married him because her parents pressured her to, because it was a good match financially, not because she loved him." Emma stared at him, stunned. "I had no idea." "Yeah, well, Mom doesn't like to talk about it," Peter said with a bitter smile. "She stayed in that marriage for years, pretending everything was fine, because that's what she thought she had to do. By the time she finally found someone she actually loved, Daniel's dad, it was too late. She'd already built this image, this perfect life she couldn't walk away from." Emma's mind raced as she tried to process this revelation. It was like a puzzle piece clicking into place, giving her a glimpse of Barbara's motives. "So she's projecting?" Emma asked. "She sees me as someone who could take advantage of Daniel the way she felt taken advantage of?" Peter nodded. "Exactly. She's so scared of history repeating itself that she can't see what's right in front of her. That you're nothing like my dad, and that Daniel is nothing like her." Emma leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed. "Why are you telling me this, Peter? You're risking a lot by going against your mom." Peter shrugged. "Because I can see how much Daniel loves you. And I can see how much this is hurting both of you. Mom isn't going to change overnight, but I thought you deserved to know where she's coming from. Maybe it'll help you figure out how to deal with her." Emma gave him a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Peter. This means a lot." Peter returned her smile, though his eyes remained serious. "Just be careful, okay? Mom's not gonna back down easily. She's stubborn as hell, and she hates admitting she's wrong. But if anyone can get through to her, it's you." Later that evening, Emma shared Peter's revelations with Daniel as they sat together on the couch, a blanket draped over their laps. "It makes sense," Daniel said after a long pause. "I always knew Mom's first marriage was complicated, but I never realized how much it shaped her. I guess she's been carrying that baggage all these years." Emma nodded. "It doesn't excuse what she's done, but it helps me understand her better. Maybe if I can show her that I'm not a threat, that I'm not here to take anything away from you, she'll start to let go of her fears." Daniel wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "You shouldn't have to prove yourself to her, Emma. She should see how amazing you are without you having to jump through hoops." "I know," Emma said softly. "But if there's a chance I can fix this, for both of our sakes, I have to try." Daniel kissed the top of her head, his voice full of warmth. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. Whatever happens, we'll get through it together." As Emma lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Barbara's hostility wasn't just about prejudice or control. It was about fear. Fear of repeating the mistakes of the past. Emma didn't know if she could fully break through Barbara's walls, but she was determined to try. For her marriage, for Daniel, and for herself. The battle was far from over, but Emma was ready for the next move. The tension that had been simmering for weeks finally reached a boiling point on Saturday afternoon. Emma and Daniel had agreed to host a casual barbecue at their home, inviting a small group of friends and family in an attempt to move past the lingering unease from the dinner debacle. Emma had hoped the event might serve as an olive branch, a chance for Barbara to see her in a different light, surrounded by the people who cared about her and Daniel. By mid-afternoon, the backyard was filled with the scent of grilling burgers and the sound of laughter. Daniel was stationed at the grill, chatting with Peter, while Emma mingled with their friends, offering drinks and making sure everyone felt at ease. When Barbara arrived, however, the atmosphere shifted. She was dressed impeccably as always, in a crisp white blouse and tailored slacks, her expression as cool and composed as ever. She offered polite smiles to the guests but made no effort to engage beyond superficial pleasantries. "Barbara, I'm so glad you could make it," Emma said warmly, determined to maintain her composure. Barbara's lips curved into a tight smile. Of course, dear. I wouldn't miss an opportunity to spend time with my family. Emma ignored the subtle edge in her voice and led her to the seating area where Michelle and a few other guests were chatting. She made sure Barbara had a drink before excusing herself to check on Daniel. She seems manageable, Daniel said when Emma approached him at the grill. For now, Emma replied, watching Barbara from across the yard. Let's just get through today without any fireworks. But the peace didn't last long. The breaking point came an hour later, when the conversation shifted to the couple's plans for the future. So, Emma, Barbara began, her tone overly casual as she sipped her wine. What are your thoughts on starting a family? I imagine that's the next step now that you're comfortably settled. Emma froze, feeling the weight of the question. It wasn't the first time Barbara had made pointed remarks about her role as Daniel's wife, but this was the most direct she had been. Daniel stepped in quickly, his voice firm but measured. Mom, that's not exactly an appropriate question for a casual barbecue. Oh, nonsense, Barbara replied, waving a hand dismissively. These are important conversations. After all, it's only natural to think about how Emma plans to contribute to the Whitman legacy. Emma's cheeks burned, and she could feel the eyes of the other guests on her. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. Barbara, I appreciate your interest, but that's a private matter between Daniel and me. Barbara arched an eyebrow. Is it? 'Cause it seems to me that these decisions affect more than just the two of you. This family has responsibilities, expectations. Surely you understand that. The air grew heavy with tension. Peter and Michelle exchanged uncomfortable glances, while the other guests shifted awkwardly in their seats. Mom, Daniel said, his voice sharper now. That's enough. But Barbara wasn't finished. She set down her glass and leaned forward, her gaze fixed on Emma. You've done well to adapt to this lifestyle, Emma, but let's not pretend it's been an easy transition. I just want to make sure you're prepared for what's expected of you. Emma felt a surge of anger rise within her, years of restraint and quiet endurance threatening to spill over. She stood, her hands trembling as she met Barbara's gaze. Prepared for what, Barbara? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. To meet your impossible standards. To prove over and over that I'm good enough for your son. 'Cause I've done that. And I'm done trying to earn your approval. The backyard fell silent. Even the sound of the grill seemed to fade as everyone turned to watch the confrontation unfold. Barbara's eyes narrowed. You're being dramatic, Emma. I've only ever wanted what's best for Daniel. No, Emma shot back. You've only ever wanted control. You can't stand that Daniel chose me because it means you don't get to dictate every aspect of his life. But he's not a child anymore, Barbara. He's a grown man and he made his choice. He chose me. And if you can't accept that, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here. Barbara's face flushed, her composure slipping for the first time. She opened her mouth to respond, but Daniel stepped forward, placing himself between his wife and his mother. Emma's right, he said, his voice calm but firm. I love you, Mom, but this has to stop. If you can't respect Emma and our marriage, then I don't know how we can move forward as a family. Barbara looked at her son, her expression a mix of shock and hurt. You're choosing her over me. I'm not choosing anyone, Daniel replied. I'm asking you to be a part of our lives in a way that's healthy and respectful. But if you can't do that, then yes, I'll always choose my wife. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Barbara stared at Daniel for a long moment before rising from her seat. I see, she said quietly. If that's how you feel, then perhaps I've overstayed my welcome. She turned and walked toward the house, her heels clicking sharply against the stone path. No one moved or spoke until the sound of her car engine faded into the distance. The guests began to disperse shortly after, offering polite goodbyes and sympathetic looks. Once the yard was empty, Emma sank onto the couch in the living room, exhausted. Daniel sat beside her, taking her hand in his. Are you okay? I don't know, Emma admitted. I'm glad I stood up to her. But I didn't want it to come to this. Daniel kissed her temple, his voice soft. You did what you had to do. And I'm proud of you. Emma leaned into him, drawing comfort from his presence. She didn't know what the future held for their relationship with Barbara, but for the first time, she felt a sense of relief. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. The days following Barbara's abrupt departure from the barbecue were quiet, but not in a peaceful way. For Emma and Daniel, it felt like waiting for a storm to either dissipate or rage anew. Each evening, Emma found herself glancing at her phone, half hoping for a call or a message from Barbara. She didn't want another fight, but she craved closure. A sign that the confrontation had not been the end of their relationship with Daniel's mother, but rather the start of something better. Daniel, ever supportive, did his best to shield Emma from the emotional fallout, though she could see how much the situation weighed on him. Barbara's absence, especially in the context of their typically tight-knit family, left a void he couldn't ignore. On Thursday evening, Emma sat on the living room couch, scrolling mindlessly through emails while Daniel cooked dinner. The sound of the knife rhythmically hitting the cutting board was a steady, comforting backdrop to her swirling thoughts. The doorbell rang, breaking her reverie. She looked toward Daniel, who glanced back with a puzzled expression. Were we expecting anyone? He asked. Emma shook her head. Not that I know of. Daniel wiped his hands on a kitchen towel and went to answer the door. Emma listened. Her curiosity piqued as she heard the faint murmur of voices. Then came a pause, a silence heavy enough to draw her to the doorway. When she reached the front hall, she froze. Standing on the porch, looking uncharacteristically uncertain, was Barbara Whitman. "Mom," Daniel said, his tone a mixture of surprise and caution. "May I come in?" Barbara asked, her voice softer than Emma had ever heard it. Daniel hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. Emma's heart raced as Barbara entered the house, her sharp blue eyes briefly meeting Emma's before flicking away. She was impeccably dressed, as always, in a tailored navy blazer and matching heels, but there was a vulnerability in her posture that Emma had never seen before. "I won't take up too much of your time," Barbara began, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "But I've been doing a lot of thinking since the barbecue." Emma swallowed hard, bracing herself. "Would you like to sit down?" she offered, gesturing to the living room. Barbara nodded, and they all moved into the room. Emma perched on the edge of the couch, while Barbara settled into an armchair across from her. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, watching silently but attentively. For a moment, the room was filled with an awkward, expectant silence. Then Barbara cleared her throat. "I owe you both an apology," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I realize now that I've been unfair. To you, Emma, and to you, Daniel." Emma blinked, stunned. Of all the possible outcomes she had imagined, this wasn't one of them. Barbara continued, her gaze fixed on her hands. "I've spent so much time trying to protect this family, to uphold the legacy your father and I built, that I lost sight of what really matters. I thought I was doing what was best for you, Daniel, but all I've done is push you away. And Emma," she hesitated, her voice faltering slightly, "I've judged you harshly. I see that now." Emma's chest tightened. She had waited so long for Barbara to acknowledge her efforts, to see her as more than an outsider. But hearing the words now, she wasn't sure how to respond. "I let my own insecurities and fears dictate how I treated you," Barbara admitted. "I thought I was protecting Daniel from a mistake, but in reality, I was letting my past cloud my judgment." Daniel stepped forward, his expression softening. "Mom, we've all made mistakes. But the question is, where do we go from here?" Barbara looked up at him, her blue eyes glistening. "I want to try. I want to be better. For you, for Emma, and for this family." Emma took a deep breath, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "Barbara, I appreciate your apology, and I want to move forward too. But it's going to take time. Trust doesn't happen overnight." Barbara nodded, her lips curving into a faint smile. "I understand. And I'll do whatever it takes to earn that trust." The following months were a cautious but steady journey toward reconciliation. Barbara made an effort to be more present in Emma and Daniel's lives, not as a critic, but as a supporter. She joined them for casual dinners, asked about Emma's work, and even extended invitations to Emma's parents, something she had never done before. At first, Emma was wary, wondering if Barbara's efforts were genuine or simply a way to save face. But over time, she began to see glimpses of sincerity in Barbara's actions. The way she listened without interrupting, the small but thoughtful gestures like bringing Emma a bouquet of flowers after a successful real estate deal. Daniel noticed the change too. He remarked one evening as they sat on the patio watching the sunset, "I think she's really trying him. And it's because of you." Emma shook her head, a smile tugging at her lips. "It's because of us, Daniel. We didn't give up." On a crisp autumn afternoon, Emma and Daniel hosted their anniversary celebration in their backyard, the same place where the confrontation with Barbara had unfolded months earlier. But this time the atmosphere was entirely different. The yard was filled with laughter and conversation as family and friends gathered around the long, rustic table adorned with pumpkins and golden leaves. Peter was playing with the kids near the fire pit, while Michelle chatted with Emma's mother over glasses of spiced cider. Barbara arrived early, bringing a homemade apple pie, a gesture that surprised everyone. She hugged Emma warmly, her smile genuine. "Happy anniversary, dear," she said, her voice free of the guarded tone that had once been her default. "Thank you, Barbara," Emma replied, feeling a pang of gratitude she hadn't expected. As the evening wore on, Barbara and Emma found themselves alone near the patio, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "You've built something beautiful here," Barbara said quietly, her gaze on the twinkling lights strung across the yard. Emma smiled. "Thank you. It hasn't always been easy, but it's worth it." Barbara nodded, then turned to Emma, her expression earnest. "I want you to know how much I respect you, Emma. You've shown me a strength and grace that I didn't see before. And I'm sorry it took me so long to realize it." Emma's throat tightened, but she managed a smile. "Thank you, Barbara. That means a lot." The two women stood in companionable silence, the tension that had once defined their relationship replaced by something resembling mutual understanding. As the party drew to a close, Daniel wrapped his arms around Emma, pulling her close as they watched their guests laughing and mingling under the soft glow of the lights. "Look at this," he said, his voice filled with awe. "We made it, stronger than ever." Emma leaned into him, her heart full. "We did. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. Thank you for reading. We hope this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of love, perseverance, and the ability to mend even the most fractured relationships. If you enjoyed Emma and Daniel's journey, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your favorite part of the story in the comments below. Was there a moment that resonated with you? Have you faced similar challenges in your own family? Let us know, we'd love to connect with you. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one. By subscribing, you'll join a community of readers who value stories that uplift, inspire, and remind us of the beauty of human connection. Hit that like button and share this story with your friends and family. Every like and share helps us continue creating meaningful content just for you. Thank you for being a part of this journey. Until next time, keep believing in love, growth, and the power of new beginnings.